Hey, I'm Maggie. Welcome to aliencherry.studio. Wonderful to have you with me. Today, I'm going to build on a book. I'd like to make a tribute to J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on January 3rd, 1892, and passed away on September 2nd, 1973. Now, normally here's where I would talk about the author and this work and why it is important to me. However, I'm finding this extremely difficult. I have written and rewritten this section dozens of times. How can one explain,
No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
or even sum up, such an extraordinary person? I have found myself tumbling down rabbit holes and getting lost in academic weeds because Tolkien's works are so densely packed that once you start peeling back the layers, there's just more and more and more layers, and I find them all fascinating. I can hardly sum up why the Silmarillion means so much to me, never mind explain. So, I'm going to try to mostly speak off the cuff, consulting scraps of previous drafts, rather than working off a wholly coherent script. Let us hope this is not a tale that grows in the telling. Tolkien was first and foremost a philologist, a lover of the literature, language, and etymology found in historical sources. As Ursula K. Le Guin marked, word-making is one of the roots of fantasy. It reaches its peak in Tolkien, who said he wrote The Lord of the Rings so that they could say good morning in Elvish. Nowhere is this more apparent to me than in The Silmarillion, which is the world-creating mythos that leads to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It's a collection of the legends found and told within Middle-earth, which are referenced and influence the aforementioned tales. What I find interesting is that they are not necessarily definitive. Tolkien began work on the Silmarillion in the trenches of World War I and was still tinkering with it until his death. Tolkien's son, Christopher, with much difficulty pulled together a relatively cohesive work from his father's vast collection of notebooks on the subject. In the foreword to the Silmarillion, he makes note of the conflicting bits of prose, of tense and viewpoints, and a lack of fullness or completion of any of the works. And while you might think this would be detrimental, it's not. Tolkien's conceit while he was writing these tales was that he was discovering the works and then translating them into modern English. As such, you kind of get the same feeling as when reading ancient myths of real cultures. They all have variances and even contradictions. And whether that was actually intended by Tolkien or not, I think it's one of the reasons why his works endure, despite the unpolished nature of this work. Thus then, the Silmarillion is the seed which allows the two trees of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to flourish. I'm being very deliberate with that metaphor. Not allegory, never allegory. As one of my favourite tales within the Silmarillion is the creation of the two trees of Valinor. These are the lights of the world from which, primordially, all the great tales of Middle-earth are born, as they are the source of the titular Silmarils. The Lord of the Rings can trace its conflict all the way back to this tale. Sam even mentions it in The Two Towers. Why, sir, I've never thought of it before. You've got some of the light of the Silmarils and that starglass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? No, they never end as tales, said Frodo. But the people in them come and go when their parts ended. I think it's easier as well in the Silmarillion, more than Tolkien's other works, to see his desire to create and develop languages. In Tolkien's own words, legends depend on the language to which they belong, but a living language depends equally on the legends which it conveys by tradition. Created languages like Esperanto are dead, far deader than ancient unused languages, because their authors never invented any legends. So Tolkien, in full linguistic geekery, created the Silmarillion and other tales, in part to explain how and why his elves have developed multiple different languages, despite a common root. It's just due to the geological and political turmoil they've experienced over the ages. Now, I must admit here that coincidentally, I first became invested in the Silmarillion whilst I was taking an introductory linguistics course. So learning about how languages evolve and then seeing that play out in his text brought me a lot of joy. I've always been a fan of wordplay, so deep diving into Tolkien's linguistic experiments, I found incredibly fun. And yes, you may judge me now. If you know where to look, there are call-outs and references and scholarly puns that add an extra layer to Tolkien's work, especially if you're into that sort of thing. My favourite example comes, well, not from the Silmarillion, but from the Two Towers. Treebeard speaks of the Entmoot, a meaning to bring the rest of the Ents up to speed on the wicked doings of Saruman and convince them to bring him to justice. Now, moot, these days, means a thing to be discussed or debated, generally in a purely academic or abstract way. It's often said when there's no point in discussing something further, it's a moot point. However, moot comes from an Old English word meaning assembly, and in the Anglo-Saxon age, and I cannot overstate how influenced Tolkien was by the Anglo-Saxon age, meant a gathering by which to dispense justice, like a court. However, by the 1500s, the word was only used in the phrase moot court, that is a practice law court for students, hence why it is now rather synonymous with debatable, also not of any real bearing. I'm sure Tolkien was aware of all of these meanings, and the background of the word. I would say he may have even researched it as part of his work on the Oxford English Dictionary, but I know he was given the section between waggle and warlock. So, moot is an entirely fitting word in this part of the story as it relates to the Entmoot. And I cannot help but think that the good professor was chuckling to himself as he wrote it. I know I would be. These are only a few of the reasons why I love the Silmarillion. So with all that in mind and our inspiration piece complete, let's move from paper to plastic. The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, of the beginning of days. And when Valinor was full wrought and the mansions of the Valar were established, in the midst of the plain beyond the mountains they built their city, Valmar of many bells. Before its western gate there was a greened mound, Elzahar, that is named also Kolarai, and Yavanna hallowed it. And she sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence, and watered the mould with tears. In that time the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in the Mahaxanar, the Ring of Doom near to the golden gates of Valmar, and Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower, and thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna have made, they have the most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were as shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new-opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Tilpirion the one was called in Valinor, and Silfion and Minqualote, and many other names. But Laurelin the other was, and Malinalda, and Colurian, and many names in song beside. In 7 hours the glory of each tree waxed to full and waned again to naught, and each awoke once more to life an hour before the other ceased to shine. Thus in Valinor, twice every day, there came a gentle hour of softer light when both trees were faint and their gold and silver beams were mingled. Telperion was the elder of the trees and came first to full stature and to bloom. And that first hour in which he shone, the white glimmer of a silver dawn, the Valar reckoned not into the tale of hours, but named it the opening hour, and counted from it the ages of their reign in Valinor. Therefore, at the 6th hour of the first day, and all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour Lorelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Lorelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. But the light that was spilled from the trees endured long, ere it was taken up into the airs or sank down into the earth, and the dews of Telperion and the rain that fell from Lorelin Varda hoarded in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. I know it probably doesn't come across in this video, but much like the introductory passage, it took me a fair few attempts to get to this result. It's odd, because the build isn't particularly complex, especially as I used the Hans Christian Andersen set as a jumping off point for the book part, and the tree structures are fairly simple, albeit fiddly. Oh my goodness, come on man, don't be like this. I think it's because I really wanted to do justice to the vision of Telperion and Lorelin that Tolkien has conjured in my head. These trees of majestic beauty and light, sown with the love for all growing things and watered with pity and hope. And in the end, that is really why I love the Silmarillion and indeed all of Tolkien's work. This emphasis on hope in the face of despair. Change isn't found through great power or strength of arms, but more often through love and empathy and an enduring desire to do the right thing. And that is an encouraging thought. Have yourself a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.